The sunset slowly sank into the sea as I sat on the balcony, feeling the warm breeze on my face. Everything was supposed to be perfect, but inside, something tightened. She came out of the shower, the scent of shampoo filling the room. Her wet hair softly touched her shoulders and a smile played on her face, that very smile I loved so much. I smiled back, but my gaze involuntarily shifted to the nightstand. Her phone vibrated, the screen blinked. She quickly picked it up, turning her back to me. I noticed her fingers were slightly trembling. "Just checking the weather for tomorrow," she said without turning around. I nodded, but the faint feeling of unease didn't go away. Below, I could hear the laughter of vacationers and the splash of waves. I turned to her, trying to regain my composure. The vacation had just begun, and I wanted to believe it was just my exhaustion. I approached her and gently hugged her from behind, but she pulled away slightly, as if unintentionally. "Where are you going?" I asked when she started packing sportswear into her bag. "To the gym," she replied with unexpected ease. "I just want to stretch a bit." Strange. Sports had never been her passion. I stood on the balcony watching her leave and felt like a stranger in this perfect vacation. Maybe I was just being paranoid? Through the sound of the wind, I heard the elevator softly close. I went back to the room and placed her heart-shaped bracelet on the nightstand, the one I had given her before the trip. She hadn't worn it. A hollow feeling settled in my stomach. I walked out to the beach where dark waves merged with the horizon. We had dreamed of this vacation. I wanted to bring back the version of us that laughed, holding hands while looking at the sea. But now I realized something in her eyes had changed. The sand crunched underfoot as I slowly walked along the shore. People around me laughed, someone flew a kite, children built sandcastles. I stopped and looked around. Everything seemed calm, but inside me it felt like a storm was raging. Why couldn't I just enjoy the moment? Why did this anxiety eat away at me? I remembered her smile when she came out of the shower. But now it seemed somehow empty. I caught myself realizing I hadn't seen that lively spark in her eyes for a long time, the one that always made me feel needed. I took out my phone, opened the messenger. I wanted to text her, ask how the gym was, but I stopped. It was silly. I couldn't be that jealous husband who doesn't let her breathe freely. But the thought that she was hiding something important didn't leave me. I glanced back at the hotel, our windows were dark. Suddenly a wave of weakness hit me. I sat down on the cold sand, trying to make sense of my feelings. Maybe I was indeed overthinking? Maybe it was just my fear of losing her, the fear that settled in me back when that icy distance first appeared between us. I stood on the sand for a long time, feeling the cold waves touch my feet. It seemed like I was looking not at the sea, but into emptiness. What if this vacation, which was supposed to bring us closer, would become the point of no return? In the morning, I woke up alone. Half of the bed was already made. Her sports outfit hung on the chair, dry and neatly folded. So, she must have returned from the workout during the night. But why didn't I hear her? I rubbed my face, trying to chase away unpleasant thoughts. Opening the window, I breathed in the fresh sea air. At the reception, they said breakfast was being served on the terrace. Going down, I saw her. She was sitting at a distant table, laughing. Opposite her sat a man. Broad shoulders, confident posture. I recognized him, her former classmate. They were drinking coffee, and I noticed how she slightly tilted her head back, laughing. My heart clenched. I slowly approached, trying not to show my tension. "Good morning," I said with a forced smile. "Oh, hi." She jumped up as if caught off guard. "This is Ryan, remember? We studied together." Ryan extended his hand and I shook it automatically, feeling the cold ring on his finger. He was wearing a sports tank top, apparently just from the gym too. "Are you going to the gym too?" I asked. "Yeah," my wife replied, lowering her eyes. "Decided to get in shape." We had breakfast together, but every toast felt wooden, every word sounded forced. I felt out of place. Ryan talked about his work and how often he traveled. My wife listened to him attentively, barely noticing my presence. After breakfast, I slowly went back to the room, leaving her on the terrace. A swirl of emotions kept me from thinking straight. Why didn't she tell me she met him? Why did she hide their meeting at all? I tried to calm down, convincing myself it was just a coincidence. But inside, everything was boiling. Later, I heard her return to the room. She smiled as if nothing had happened. "Have you eaten?" she asked, as if not noticing my tension. I just nodded. I didn't have the strength to talk. That scene on the terrace flashed in my mind, her laughter, the ease of their interaction. When was the last time she laughed with me like that? I caught her gaze, warm, glowing. The same one that hadn't been directed at me in a long time. My heart sank into emptiness. It became clear I was fighting a shadow that had already settled between us. When I woke up, she was gone again. The bracelet with the heart left on the chair seemed to mock me, a symbol of what I was losing. But this time I decided to act, find out the truth instead of waiting for her explanations. I headed to the gym. At the entrance I bumped into Ryan. He looked tired but satisfied. I tried not to show irritation, just nodded at his greeting. Early riser? He noted with a smile. Yeah, love morning runs, I lied. Inside everything was boiling. The gym was almost empty. I looked around and realized she wasn't there. A mix of relief and disappointment washed over me. On the shelf I noticed her water bottle. I picked it up and felt it ice cold. So she'd been here recently. But where was she now? I asked the receptionist. Did you see my wife? Was she here this morning? The young guy thought for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, she was. Left about 10 minutes ago. I think she headed towards the pool. I stood there stunned. Thoughts of their breakfast conversation, her lightness, his confidence, swirled in my mind. Why hadn't she told me anything? What was going on between them? I walked outside, breathing in the fresh air. Too many thoughts and suspicions. Too many coincidences. Maybe I was really losing my mind out of jealousy? Or were my suspicions true? I leaned against the wall, feeling my heart race. I had to do something to stop overthinking. But how? I glanced back at the gym, hoping she would come out alone, with her usual smile, proving it was just my imagination. But instead, one word echoed in my mind: deceit. She came back late in the evening, said she'd been at the gym. I nodded, trying not to show my irritation. But her gym clothes still smelled fresh, as if they had just been taken out of the closet. I tried not to look at her as she walked past me to the bathroom. My heart pounded loudly and anxiety throbbed in my temples. Slowly, I approached her bag and carefully unzipped it. Inside, perfectly folded towels, a water bottle, sneakers with clean soles. Everything looked as if it had never been used. The quiet sound of water from the shower. I closed the bag and stepped back to the window. Something didn't add up. I tried to suppress my paranoia, but thoughts kept flooding in. She always used to say she hated sports. Why such a sudden change in habits? I recalled her conversation with Ryan on the terrace, how easily she laughed, how her eyes glowed. Maybe I really was going crazy with jealousy? Or was I just too afraid to admit the obvious? I tried to summon the courage to simply ask her directly, but the words stuck in my throat. She came out in a robe, towel drying her hair. I glanced over my shoulder. How was the workout? I asked, trying to sound casual. Great, she smiled, but her eyes avoided mine. I feel like a new person. I nodded as if agreeing. She walked to the mirror and took off the necklace, the one I gave her for our anniversary. She put it into the jewelry box and I noticed her fingers trembling slightly. Tired? I asked softly, hoping for a conversation. A bit. I think I'll go straight to bed. We lay in bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Her breathing was steady and calm. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to find any clue to the truth. Why did everything feel so fake? I listened to her breathing, trying to calm down, but the anxiety only grew stronger. At some point, I quietly got up and went to the window. The moon reflected in the black water of the pool, and I suddenly thought I saw them there, her and him, laughing and carefree. I closed my eyes, trying to banish the image. End of chapter 4. I returned to the bed, lay on the very edge, and closed my eyes. But instead of sleep, a heavy wave of doubt washed over me. Maybe it was easier not to know the truth? Or was I willing to go all the way to find out, no matter how much it hurt? I stood at the door of our room, listening to the silence. My heart was pounding wildly, and my palms were sweaty. Taking a step forward seemed like an impossible task. What would I see in there? I quietly pushed the door open and peeked inside. The door was slightly ajar, as if whoever left had just stepped out for a moment. Empty. The room looked untouched, the bed neatly made, towels folded on the chair. I took a few steps inside and suddenly noticed her phone on the table. Her voice from the bathroom made me freeze. I heard her humming softly, carefree. For a moment, I wanted to leave, pretend I had made a mistake, that none of this was real. But I was already inside. The phone vibrated again. A message. I couldn't resist and glanced at the screen. An unfamiliar number. One word. Miss you. I felt the ground slip from under my feet. I stepped back from the table, trying not to breathe. Something inside me tore apart. I tried to find an excuse, grasp onto the thought that it was just a mistake. But her voice, so calm, so serene, only made the pain sharper. It was as if she was unaware of my torment, as if I had already become invisible to her. The bathroom door opened, and she came out, throwing the robe over her shoulders. Our eyes met, and her face froze. For a moment, it seemed like I saw fear in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" she asked, forcing a smile. "I was looking for you." You were at the gym. My voice trembled despite my effort to stay calm. Yes? She turned to the mirror, drying her hair. Why? I just wanted to invite you to dinner. I took a step back, feeling my insides tighten. She looked at me through the mirror, and something flickered in her eyes that I couldn't decipher. I tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't cooperate. I knew if I asked directly now, she would start lying. Or even worse, she would admit it. And I wasn't ready to hear the truth. When I left the room, the cold air hit my face, sobering me up. I walked toward the elevator as if in a fog, thoughts spinning wildly in my head. I tried to convince myself it was just a misunderstanding. But the phone, the unfamiliar number, miss you. Everything was falling into a pattern I didn't want to recognize. I headed to the promenade, staring at the night sea. The waves seemed as dark as my thoughts. I wanted to scream, but I just clenched my fists. I knew something was wrong. I'd felt it from the start. But for some reason, I kept making excuses, afraid to shatter the illusion. I returned to our room and closed the door, trying to catch my breath. Inside, the emptiness spread like a black hole, swallowing all my feelings. I realized I no longer trusted her. But could I even trust myself? That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the edge of the bed, listening to her steady breathing. Each breath reminded me of the lies that had grown between us. I knew this couldn't go on. The morning greeted us with the roar of the waves. She got ready for the gym again, but this time I couldn't hold back. I'll go with you, I said, trying not to meet her eyes. She froze, as if I had suggested something unimaginable. You? To the gym? She tried to smile, but her voice faltered. Why not? I got up from the bed, put on a t-shirt and sneakers. My heart pounded loudly, but I knew I needed to see everything with my own eyes. We walked down the corridor in silence. She tried to walk faster as if hoping to lose me. At the gym entrance, she stopped. Maybe you'd rather swim? She suggested, raising an eyebrow. You're not a fan of machines. It's more fun together. I tried to hide how tense I was. She nodded and walked inside. I followed her, but as soon as I entered, she moved to the treadmill, choosing the one furthest away. I settled on a machine opposite, occasionally glancing in her direction. Half an hour later, I realized I had been wrong. She was really working out, serious and focused. Sweat dripped from her temples. Her breathing grew heavy. I started to think that maybe I had just worked myself up when I suddenly noticed Ryan at the entrance. He gave her a brief glance and headed toward the dumbbells. They didn't greet each other or exchange a single word, but I felt an invisible thread tighten between them. Light, almost imperceptible. I tried to focus on my own exercises, but inside, everything was boiling. Why didn't she react to his presence at all? Had I just imagined it? Or were they being cautious? When the workout ended, I noticed how she briefly looked at Ryan, but quickly turned away. I pretended not to see, though inside I felt a pang. When she finished exercising, I left first to avoid raising suspicion. But now, a new thought was pounding in my head. What if I misunderstood everything? Maybe there was something else between them, something unrelated to what I feared? I knew I couldn't live in this state of uncertainty anymore. We returned to the room, and I couldn't hold back. The words burst out on their own. Are you hiding something from me? I asked, feeling a tight knot forming inside. She gave me a quick glance, then turned to the window. What do you mean? Her voice was calm, but her hands were nervously tugging at the robe's tie. You've changed. All this, the gym, the early mornings, meeting Ryan. I trailed off, afraid to continue. She sighed and turned to me. Her eyes were as cold as glass. You're paranoid, she said calmly. I'm just trying to take care of myself. Is that a problem? That's not it. I clenched my fists to keep my hands from trembling. You don't even wear the bracelet I gave you. She instinctively touched her wrist as if to check. For a moment, her face darkened, but she quickly regained composure. I just don't want to ruin it at the gym, she replied, forcing a smile. I felt a wave of anger rise inside me. Then why is Ryan here? I asked sharply. You never mentioned he'd be staying at this hotel." She frowned as if blaming me for everything. "Coincidence?" she snapped, turning away. "I didn't know he was here either. We just talk. Do you really think I—" She broke off, her eyes filling with tears. I lowered my head, feeling my anger dissolve into a cold residue. If she was truly innocent, I was becoming a jealous paranoiac. But if she was lying— I took a step toward the window, trying to gather my thoughts. Outside, the sea calmly rolled waves onto the sand as if nothing was happening. I felt lost in this endless movement of water. "I just want to understand," I said quietly, not turning around. "Why have you become so distant?" She didn't reply. I could only hear her steady breathing behind me. Then she spoke softly. "I don't know. It's complicated. I don't understand it myself." She went into the bathroom, closing the door loudly behind her. I remained in the room, stunned by the silence. If I was wrong, I had already lost her forever. But if I was right, who was she to me now? I woke up in the middle of the night. The room was engulfed in darkness, with only faint streetlight seeping through the curtains. I turned to her side of the bed, empty. Panic flared instantly. I reached for the phone on the nightstand and checked the time, 3 in the morning. My heart tightened with a sense of impending doom. I got up and noticed her bag by the door emptied as if she had hurriedly packed. Without thinking, I went into the corridor. It was empty and silent. I headed down to the reception, where a sleepy-looking young clerk was on duty. "Have you seen my wife?" I asked, trying to hide my worry. The guy shrugged. "I saw her outside about 10 minutes ago. She was heading toward the beach." I rushed outside, feeling the cold night air hit my face. The empty beach was deserted. I walked along the shore, peering into the darkness. And then I noticed 2 shadows by the pier. As I approached, I could hear their voices, muted but recognizable. She was standing next to Ryan, his hand resting on her shoulder. I froze, unable to take another step. My mind buzzed with thoughts. She was saying something, her voice trembled as if she was explaining. He leaned in closer, and I saw her press against his shoulder. Images flashed in my mind, her lies, his sudden appearance, the workouts, all merging into a single, painful knot. I wanted to step forward, demand answers, but my legs wouldn't move. Suddenly, she turned and ran back toward the hotel as if trying to escape. Ryan stayed at the pier, watching her go. I hid behind a boat so she wouldn't see me. As she passed, I could hear her sobs muffled by the night wind. I stayed behind the boat, waiting for her to disappear into the darkness. Ryan remained standing, his hands shoved into his pockets, staring at the water. I knew I should confront them, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Fear? Or the unwillingness to face the truth? I wasn't sure anymore. When I finally mustered the courage to move, Ryan was gone and the pier was empty. I walked slowly back to the hotel, every step feeling heavier than the last. As I entered the room, she was already lying in bed, turned to the wall, her shoulders slightly trembling. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, my mind blank and numb. The room was filled with the muffled sound of the waves crashing against the shore, echoing the turmoil inside me. In the darkness, I could feel the distance between us growing like a chasm. I didn't know how to cross it or if I even wanted to anymore. When she walked past me, I heard her sob. But shouldn't there have been joy in her voice if it was just friendship? I took a step toward the pier, but suddenly realized I didn't want to talk to Ryan right now. The fear of hearing the truth was stronger than my curiosity. I stayed in the shadows, watching as he stood at the edge, his head lowered. Maybe they had fought? Or was it just his guilt? I went back to the room, feeling everything crumble inside. If she lied then, it meant that now it was also a lie. I stood by the window, looking at the empty beach, and I realized this was the end of what I knew as our love. I watched her when she returned to the room. Her eyes were red, her face tired. She tried to smile, but I already knew everything that connected us was left somewhere on that beach. "Where were you?" I asked, trying not to let my voice tremble. "Couldn't sleep," she whispered, avoiding my gaze. "Wanted to get some air." I looked at her, the woman I loved, the one I thought was my soulmate. But now a stranger stood before me, full of secrets and lies. "I know everything," I said quietly. Her face tensed, eyes widened. She opened her mouth, but I didn't give her time to explain. "You were with Ryan, right? All this time. The gym lies, the night walks. You didn't even try to hide it." She lowered her head and tears rolled down her cheeks. I felt something break inside. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "It just happened by chance. We met, I didn't know he was here. We just talked and then it all spiraled. I didn't want to hurt you." "But you did," I replied softly. "Why lie? Why give me hope that we could start over?" She sat on the bed, covering her face with her hands. I looked at her, but inside there was no more pain or anger, just emptiness. I tried to bring back the feelings, but it all seemed to dissolve. I lost myself, and us too. Ryan just reminded me of who I was before all of this. I nodded, accepting her words. Deep down, I understood. Love can truly disappear without leaving a chance. But accepting it was the hardest part. I took my suitcase and started packing. She didn't stop me, just sat there, silently watching. When I closed the door behind me, there was nothing left inside, neither hate nor forgiveness. I walked down to the beach and sat on the cold sand. The waves were no longer audible, just the quiet whisper of the wind. I knew I would never be able to forget this night. But maybe one day I would be able to forgive. Not her, but myself, for once believing in a fairy tale that ended on this shore. At dawn, I realized that freedom from this pain was the only path to myself. I rose from the sand, brushed the salt from my hands, and took the first step into a new life. Without her, but with the hope that someday I would learn to live again.